Okay, so I have determined it's actually Twitch Sings that's making my microphone crack. So there's nothing wrong with my microphone. Twitch Sings, just for whatever reason, when it records tonight, is being stupid and not, I guess, decrackling my voice or something. I don't know. Everything's set up there, right? Like, my voice sounds fine here, but shoot. So yeah, I guess we'll just go back to watching videos then. Sorry about that. I wanted to do karaoke, but I don't know, it's just being weird. Jabba. Is that like Jabba the Hutt? That's what I imagine is Jabba the Hutt. Oh, you guys can't see anything. There we go. Now you can see Jabba the bunny. Jabun ni san. I feel like that's a terrible pet to keep in case like you ever go hungry. Jabba. That is one chonker rabbit. Bunny has its own idea. Oh my god, this is actually a huge chungus. This is a literal huge chungus.
Swedish ninjas. So, what I'm seeing is you ran out of your own content, so you're using other people's content.
That's... no. People do watch stuff all the time. As long as you do commentary over it. It's not like I'm watching, like, major YouTube videos. Like, have you even heard of this channel before now? I mean, it's kind of silly to say, like, you have none of your own content, because that's...
Ninja
Well,
being
that's
mean
like what
lol.
everyone does on Twitch, right? Like you didn't make that game yourself. Oh, you're using someone else's content because you can't make your own. Like that's sort of what streaming is it's just broadcasting something you like or find interesting. So if people want to watch videos of other
Swedish
people's
ninjas.
stuff,
Yes,
that's
I
fine,
know I'm
but
a horrible person.
you're not a horrible person. You're just trying to start shit.
Elino lal. Maybe you should try kissing Ninja.
I mean, considering I don't even make money from any of this, it's pretty hard to argue I'm being, like, exploitive or anything. If I was making money, then you'd have a much better case. Like, yeah, that's kind of bad if, you're making money off showing other people's YouTube videos.
Swedish ninjas. How about you start by kissing my ass?
Kissy kissy bum bum. Kurane said the mean word. She said the mean word. She said it again. She's bullying Siri.
Today we're going to be talking about what might be my favorite type of filtration for coffee brewing. That's using a cloth filter for coffee.
Oh, I'm gonna have to go make a coffee.
Broadly speaking, there are 3 types of filtration for coffee.
Well, if you don't like this kind of stuff, Swedish Ninja, is there anything you'd like me to play sometime?
Paper filter, something like a V60.
Because I'm kind of trying to figure out what people want me to
does
play.
a really good job of filtering out all the fine pieces of coffee.
There's something about coffee, I don't like coffee, it gives me
nausea. At the other
nausea.
end of the spectrum, you have metal filters.
Oh, you don't like coffee?
A French press. That's a big metal screen, and that will typically.
But whenever I watch an ad about coffee, I make one anyway.
Cloth, for me, is the best of both worlds. It sits right in the middle.
It's just
it
coffee.
Doesn't let through any fine pieces of coffee, so you have crystal clear looking coffee, but it does let through, I think, a little bit more of the oils. You have a different texture when it comes to the brew. Cloth filters are very common around the world. You'll see things like this, often called Nell drippers in places like Japan. You'll see things like coffee socks in lots of parts of the world, which is just like a long bag that you brew coffee in. The reason I love it is this perfect kind of hybrid of clarity and texture. And while you might think you'd want to use it for heavier bodied coffees, I actually like using lighter bodied coffees in there, things like washed Ethiopian coffees or washed Kenyan coffees, because it gives them this extra kind of richness and heaviness, and makes me want to use all the words that give people like me a terrible reputation for just talking nonsense about coffee. But I can't stress enough how much I love cloth filtered coffee. So you might be thinking, if it's so good, why wouldn't I just use it all of the time? They have a bad reputation. For kind of a good reason. It's not that they can't brew coffee. It's not that it's difficult to work with. It's difficult to clean and to keep clean. Maintaining a cloth filter is annoying, frustrating, hard work. And for many people, it's not the return on investment that they want. For that extra work, it is the improvement in your coffee enough to justify how much work you have to do. Now, many people don't do the work and have a bad experience because it's really easy to make a cloth filter taste bad. You know what happens when you forget your washing in the washing machine for like a day and it smells terrible? Well, that's the growth of mildew inside your laundry, and that's what gives it that bad smell. Mildew loves to grow in wet cotton, basically. That's like a perfect breeding ground. This right now is wet cotton. It's really easy to have that taste, have that smell appear in a cloth filter. It's really easy to make them taste disgusting because they trap little pieces of coffee, bits of oil in there, no matter how much you rinse them. Well, they taste like old oxidized coffee and forgotten laundry, and that is not what you want to taste in your morning cup of coffee. I've talked about this being a lot of work to maintain a filter. Well, what exactly is involved? The worst thing you can do is just use it, rinse it out, and then leave it to dry on the side. That slow drying process seems to be when most of the bad smells and bad tastes appear in the cloth. So don't do that. Immediately after using it, let it drain out as much as possible and then dump as much as you can of the grounds inside into the rubbish bin. Just get rid of those. Then you're going to take it to the sink and wash out as much as you can from the filter. It's unlikely you're going to do a perfect job here. Chances are there'll be a few little pieces you just can't quite get out that look just embedded in the fiber. Don't freak out too much about that. It's going to be okay. What you need to do now is keep that wet until you use it again. If you're going to use cloth every single day, then I would store the cloth in a glass in the fridge. Keep it cold, keep it completely soaked in water, and when you're ready to use it again, obviously throw that water out, give it a very good rinse, a preheat, and then you're good to go. If you want to use it now and again, wash it as much as you possibly can, and then put it in a bag, put it in the freezer. Leave it frozen until you need to use it again, and again, just run it under hot water to defrost it. There is some theory that freezing repeatedly will slightly degrade the quality of the cotton. I haven't had so many issues with that over the years. One last tip is that over time, you will slowly stain the cloth. And there is a way to undo that and actually give it a really, really, really good clean. This stuff. This isn't necessarily a brand endorsement. I just know that this particular brand does work quite well. I spoke to someone from Ernex many years ago and asked them about what was the best thing to clean coffee, and they said use this because this formulation for espresso machine cleaning was actually based on their original formulation that they used to clean the cloths in giant urn brewers that people used to use back in the day. A teaspoon of this into hot water, leave your filter to soak in it, and it will come back shockingly clean. Like, it does a really good job of getting rid of stain. You will have to rinse the life out of it to get rid of any traces of smell or odor of the soap, basically. But once you've done that, it's good to go, and it's really, really, really good at bringing a cloth filter back to looking good and tasting good again. To talk more about brewing with them, what I'm going to do in a minute is brew one of these, and I'll also brew a V60 to talk about the difference in taste between those two things. But before I do that, I've got two things to talk about. Firstly, this video has a coffee giveaway. If you can't afford coffee right now for whatever reason, whatever's going on in the world, well, enter the competition below. I'll pick 10 people anywhere in the world that I can ship coffee to, and I'll ship you a bag of coffee. And I do that because this video has a sponsor. This video is sponsored by Squarespace. If you need to build a website, then I would recommend using Squarespace. Sometimes I just have an idea, and very quickly I can sign up for a free trial, take one of their beautiful templates, and build something really,
Does the
really
basement
quickly.
have good
It's
enough
simple
internet
and it's
to
intuitive.
watch a stream?
It doesn't matter if it's going to be a portfolio or a website for my book or an e-commerce store. Squarespace has all of that stuff covered. And what I really love is that in terms of ongoing maintenance, it's really just about creating more for your website. It's not about patching things, installing things, worrying about things. It's easy and it's worry-free. But don't take my word for it. If you're curious, then just use the link down below and sign up for a free trial. And after 14 days, when you're ready to launch and you've built something beautiful, use code James Hoffman. You get 10% off any website or domain. Thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. So let's brew some coffee. I'm going to brew this almost identically to how I brew a V60. If you don't know how that works, look up here. So Bloom, 2:1. Just like the V60, I'm going to give it a gentle swirl. just to mix everything together, make sure we've got no pockets of dry coffee causing trouble. Now, a lot of the time in different parts of the world, you see a lot of different techniques. Some people like to keep a very low bed. That doesn't bother me as much. I don't mind filling the filter up a little bit more like I would do a V60. I like that higher thermal mass, and I don't worry about water leaking out of the sides of the cloth. If you look at it, you can actually see very little is coming through the cloth. Mostly it's filtering through the coffee and out of the bottom. Now, a cloth filter has a little bit less resistance. That means your brews will be a little bit quicker. And obviously it has a little bit less resistance because it lets through a little bit more. It's literally bigger gaps between the fibers than there are in paper. As such, with the same grind that would produce, say, a 3-minute 30 brew for 30 to 500 on a V60, well, here it might brew in 3 minutes. That doesn't really encourage me to change the grind that much though, because it doesn't really have a massive impact on the extraction the way that a change in grind would. However, if you do want to go a little bit finer, that may just bring out a little bit more texture and up your extraction a little bit if you feel something is missing. So that brew finished just under 3 minutes, like 2:55, which is about what I'd expect for the same grind size that would produce a 3-minute 30 brew in a V60 with one of the quicker V60 papers. Generally speaking, I would let this cool down enough to touch before I try and clean it up. I don't worry too much about staining or that kind of stuff because that's easy to fix later. So just leave it in the sink, leave it in a spare mug, leave it somewhere, drink your coffee and enjoy it, and then deal with this thing afterwards. So it's time for a taste comparison. I have a delicious brew of coffee here, and conveniently I have a delicious V60 here as well. So we have two brews. They are the same coffee, same grind setting, same dose, same water, same technique really. The primary difference is filtration method, though this brew did take maybe 20 seconds longer to filter than this one. Now this is quite a light roasted coffee. It's quite a light bodied coffee. It's a washed Ethiopian coffee. It's very floral, very pretty. Not a ton of texture to it, but it's bright and clean in a V60 and very lovely. But what about cloth? So good. So good. It just feels really lovely to drink. The texture and mouthfeel of cloth filtered coffee made well is a thing of beauty. It's my favorite filtration method for this reason. You get all of the clarity of a paper filtered coffee with this extra layer of pleasure and delight on top. It really is so lovely to drink. If I'm going to get just very pretentious, I would say it's like drinking coffee as silk, your coffee turned to velvet. I'm aware I sound ridiculous talking about coffee this way to most people, but I'm having a good time. So yeah, broadly speaking, if you're someone who loves ritual and routine, you can probably make a cloth filter work. It's all about not forgetting to do something. It's all about remembering to rinse it properly, remembering to keep it damp and kind of wet and cold the whole time, or remembering to put it in the freezer, remembering to get it out at the right time, remembering all these little pieces. If you're very good at building habits and rituals, then I think it's a very rewarding thing. If you're like me, where you're barely functional before coffee and you're quite chaotic and forgetful at times, you'll annoy yourself because you'll have just left it out for a day and you'll be frustrated at the amount of work you have to do to bring it back to being a good tasting filter. It can always be brought back unless it's growing mold or something truly disgusting, but it can usually be brought back to being a good filter again if you're willing to put in the work. How much it returns on that is really down to how much you enjoy your coffee this way. I really do enjoy coffee this way, and so it's right on the cusp of a return on investment of my time. I use paper, I like paper because I like the brew and it's easy. And actually that matters to me and I'm okay with that. The results from cloth are wonderful. If you have the chance to try it, please do, but just know what you're getting yourself in for. But with that extra work, there are definitely wonderful rewards. I'd love to hear from you. Are you using cloth at home? Have you tried cloth? Did you love it for a while and then just give up because of the work involved? Did you come from a family that brewed with a kind of big old coffee sock that just brewed really nasty, dirty tasting coffee the whole time? Did you know there was a better way and that it could do beautiful
Does
things
the
to
basement
coffee?
have good enough
I would love
internet
to
to
hear your
watch a
thoughts. I'd love to
stream?
hear from you down
My
in the comments
basement
below.
does.
But for now, I'll say
I
thank
don't know
you
if
so much
yours
for
does.
watching, and I hope you have a great day.
Don't you love it when you're learning about something and things just click? Like a light switch. Clicky switches they're pretty fun. But why do switches make noise? What's the point of all that clacking? Well, it has to do with the fact that you've been lied to. But let's not get too conspiratorial just yet. First, let's look at some of the switches that don't click, because there are some. This electronically controlled dimming module turns the lights on completely silently. No clicking there. Then again, this other one that's not a dimmer makes a pronounced clicking sound. And I didn't even touch it. What gives? Well, the dimming module is using a solid-state device known as a triac to actually turn the lights on and off, so it's not quite what I mean by a switch. This standard thing goes on or off module does in fact use a type of real switch to do its work, so you hear a click. Same with this toggle light switch, this rocker switch, this rotary switch, this lamp cord switch, this power button, the rocker switches on the studio light, oh, and the big one too, this toaster, the mode selector on this space heater, even its thermostat makes a distinct click. But why? Why be so clicky-clacky all the time? To start to answer this question, we first need to answer a simpler question. What is a switch? Well, a switch is a handheld game... No. A switch is a mechanism used to divert rail cars... No. A switch is the simplest mechanism that can control the flow of electricity. Say you have a simple table lamp and want to connect it up with the power grid. Well, we simply take its bare wires and carefully touch them to these live wires and voila! Let there be light. Now to turn the light off, all we need to do is carefully pull those wires apart and hope the live ones don't...
Nintendo. Swedish ninjas.
But this is pretty dangerous.
Clicky switches
Even
are so
Edison
you don't
knew
get
that.
electrical
So
arcing
we
inside
designed
the switch
electrical
that will melt the
sockets
switch.
which contained live wires behind an insulating barrier. And we designed plugs that would, depending on your country, somewhere between somewhat safely and completely safely, allow you to make and break electrical connections. But this isn't the most convenient way to turn something on or off, and most importantly, using them that way isn't good for your plug or your receptacle. See, if I take this lamp and plug it into this outlet, it lights up, no problem. And if I simply unplug it, it goes out, also without a problem. But watch what happens if I take this space heater and unplug it while it's running. Ooh, that was quite a spark. Let's do it again. Ooh, let's do it again. Ooh, big one. Let's do that again. Let's do that again. While this specimen continues to be amused by the sparks, we'll move on to the next jump cut. Ooh. When the heater is running, a lot of electricity is flowing into it through this cord. 1500 watts, in fact. To stop that flow of current, all we need to do is put an insulator between the contacts of the receptacle and the pins of the plug, which of course we can do simply by unplugging it. But when we unplug it, it doesn't just stop the current flow right away. There's a brief moment where that current manages to jump out from the outlet and the result is a spark. The same thing happens if you plug in the heater with it turned on right before the pins of the plug and receptacle first make contact, but the spark usually isn't as large as when an active connection is broken. And this is where you've been lied to. See, when you were little, you were probably taught about electrical conductors, like the wires in this cord, and electrical insulators, like the plastic insulation surrounding that wire. If you had a really nerdy teacher, you might have learned about semiconductors, but lots of us were sorting things into the two categories of insulators and conductors. The lie is that, just like most things in the real world, the electrical conductivity of any given substance exists on a spectrum. Everything conducts electricity when you
Yeah,
try
this guy's
hard enough,
videos are awesome.
even
This
air.
is
Now we rely
technology
on the resistance of air
connections.
all the time. Electrical
He
transmission
does a lot of
lines are
videos
typically
about
bare aluminum
electromechanical
and are held up
stuff.
in the air by stacks of insulating discs. The higher the voltage of the line, the more of these discs you need, because even they aren't perfect insulators. Nothing's a perfect insulator. And that's the problem. Air's pretty good, and when you unplug something from an electrical outlet, you do disconnect it from the power grid and stop the flow of electricity to it, precisely because there's air now between the pins of the plug and the conductors in the receptacle. But when you pull that plug out of the wall, there will be a brief moment when there's only a tiny bit of air between the plug and the socket. And this is not good. When those contacts are close but not quite touching, the air gap is so small that the breakdown voltage, that's the voltage at which an insulator fails to stay an insulator, is lower than the voltage of the electrical supply. This means that the current will actually jump the gap, and this creates an arc discharge. That's
wow.
the spark you see here. Now on its own, this isn't particularly bad. Thanks to the fact that we use AC power, the voltage crosses the 0 point 100 or 120 times per second, so that arc will usually go out nearly immediately, though it should be noted that arcs can be sustained on AC power. More importantly, the breakdown voltage of any insulator, including air, is a function of how thick it is.
One thing I'd like to learn a lot more about is electricity.
Apart, that arc will generally be unsustainable. But here's the problem. That arc is hot. Very, very hot. So hot, in fact, that it can burn the ends of the plug in the socket. So we don't want to rely on pulling the plug out of the socket to stop current flow. What do we do instead? We use a switch. All the switch does is create a break in a circuit. There are many different types of switches, but they all do fundamentally the same thing. There are two electrical contacts, and they're either touching or they're not. If they touch, current can flow, and if they don't touch, current can't. But then switches do the same thing as unplugging it. Don't they have to worry about arcing? Yes, in fact, even more so. Electrical arcs damage electrical contacts in various ways, but among the most significant ones is that the contacts eventually melt away. See, each time there's an arc, that plasma is so hot that the surface of the contact briefly melts, and that material can sputter off of it. Additionally, the high temperature can cause corrosion of the contacts, and you get lovely issues like carbon buildup, which increases the electrical resistance of the contacts, and that's not good. Even better, if the arcing is bad enough and the surface of the contacts get hot enough, they can weld together and get stuck closed. I guess that light's on forever now. Since the contacts in a switch are generally pretty small, we want to minimize the arcing that can happen because, well, an arc will warm them up quickly and cause all those problems I was just going on about. And how do we do that? Why, with speed. Remember that household voltages are low enough that an arc generally can't be sustained once the contacts are just a millimeter apart. So if you get them apart quite quickly, any arc formation that does occur will be very brief and unlikely to cause significant damage. And that is why switches click. Switches are designed with mechanisms to ensure the contacts open and close very quickly enough to prevent an arc from lasting more than maybe a millisecond or so. Effectively, the contacts are meant to slam together and then get yanked apart, and that makes an audible click. The mechanisms that accomplish this are often ingeniously simple. Many times it's just a spring cleverly integrated into a pivot. Let's take a look at a simple household rocker switch. This switch is nice and clicky. Who needs a fidget clicker when you can just run to the hardware store and get one of these? This design is almost devilishly simple. Below the faceplate are 3 pieces of brass, 2 of which are the same ones you attach wires to on the outside. The smaller one holds an electrical contact, and the larger one serves as a pivot point for a small swinging piece that holds the other contact. If there's a torque applied to the swinging piece in this direction, the contact does not touch the other one, and no current can flow through the switch. But apply a torque in the other direction, and now the contacts touch. Current flows into the switch through this terminal, through the basket thing, into the swinging thing, through the 2 contacts, and out the other terminal. All it takes to ensure the swinging contact moves quickly is a spring. See, the rocker paddle that you touch is in fact the same thing moving the contact. These grooves hold on to the edge with a little play, and when the rocker rocks back and forth, so does the contact below. But thanks to the spring, the rocker, and more importantly the contact, wants to stay in either position. The spring gets increasingly compressed as the rocker meets the apex, and once it passes it, bam, the spring expands and pushes the contact in the other direction. The result is a swift action in both directions, minimizing arcing. Pretty clever. Unfortunately though, this switch design isn't perfect. In fact, many, if not most, switches on sale today aren't. See, you can actually move the contact a bit before the spring takes over. If you carefully apply pressure on the switch, you'll see that the light goes out before it clicks into the off position. Listen carefully and you can actually hear arcing going on inside the switch. This isn't really great, especially if you have a lot of lights on the circuit you're controlling. In fact, you can see on these contacts that they have been slightly damaged, and this isn't a very old switch. I know because I installed it myself. Granted, most people don't turn the lights on and off like this. If you do it like a normal person, then the contacts are swiftly moved and arcing is minimal. Still, it annoys me that it's even possible to damage the switch at all. Many switch designs, like these lamp cord switches, are simply impossible to hold in a half
Oh,
Sure, they're not designed to carry the current of a normal light switch, but I bet these guys rarely ever fail from bad contacts. And normal switches can be made impossible to abuse. The house I grew up in was quite old, and a few rooms had toggle light switches that you could actually move nearly completely into the opposite position before the internal mechanism opened or closed the contacts with a very loud clack. Those switches were in service for 50 or 60 years, and likely still are. Granted, they were only controlling a single light in all but one case, if memory serves, so they weren't ever under much electrical stress, and they required much more force to use than modern switches, which is probably why that style went out of favor. But this paddle-style dimmer switch has a mechanism that prevents partial making and breaking of the contacts without requiring significant force. You can see that even if I use my two thumbs on both sides of the switch and very, very slowly move the paddle, the lights only go on and off with the click of the internal mechanism. This design here is what I'd call ideal, and it proves that easy-to-use switches can still be made with a fast, clicky, abuse-proof mechanism. So if you're shopping for a light switch at a hardware store, tactile feel of the switch does actually matter when it comes to switch longevity. A nice, solid snap makes me more confident than a smooth, quiet movement. This cheap toggle switch is what I'd consider awful. The toggle moves smoothly without much resistance at all, and the contact is actually broken when the switch has barely moved out of its resting position. It actually requires conscious effort to ensure the contacts are quickly moved apart, and I doubt this switch would last more than a decade on a circuit with more than a few lights. In fact, it's not even fair to say that this switch actually clicks. It more or less thuds. Any switch that's designed to interrupt even a modest current flow should, in my opinion, have a nice audible click. That plug-in thing goes on module, it's got a relay in it. Relays are electromechanical devices that control large currents with small currents. Essentially, they're a switch with some sort of external control. In this case, the small computer inside here will turn on the relay when it's been asked to, and click, the light goes on. The contacts in a relay are closed via an electromagnet and are held open with a spring. And as luck would have it, this simple arrangement means the switch opens and closes quickly, and so it clicks. Fun fact, when we need to automatically control very high current loads, we use what are essentially large relays, but we call them contactors. Contactors often just use air to break the circuit like any other switch. But when we get into high voltage applications, the contactor might be contained in a vacuum. And in really high voltage applications, like in power grid substations, you might find switches and circuit breakers inside a volume of sulfur hexafluoride, which is an incredibly good insulator, and this is in fact the primary commercial use of SF6. Now, not all switches need to
sulfur
click. Switches that don't carry a lot of current, like the clicky buttons
on your mouse,
because
hex is 6,
don't need
like
to click
hexagon.
at all because there's not going to be any arcing going on in there. They click mainly because that style of switch is designed to provide a lot of tactile feedback. And actually, a very clicky switch can be a disadvantage in digital devices because now you might need to implement some sort of debouncing, but that's beyond the scope of this video. So, now you know why switches click. They're really just prolonging their life. And if you want to prolong the life of the switches in your life even more, be sure you always give them a good flick, or poke. Since many modern designs kind of make you a part of the contact closing and opening action, you can and should click to your heart's
Swedish
content.
ninjas.
Thanks for watching,
You should
and
breathe
thank you to
some
the fine
sulfur
folks supporting the channel
hexafluoride.
through Patreon. I really do appreciate your support. If you're interested in joining these people and supporting the channel,
why you got so much
check
salt
out the link
there?
at the end screen or in the description.
Why you gotta be
Thanks
so salty, Swedish ninja?
What you are looking at is legendary director Andrei Tarkovsky's response to one of the worst things that can happen to a filmmaker. While filming the most expensive shot of his movie, The Sacrifice, involving a man burning his house down in one long take, the camera jammed during the take and the house burned down.
Oh no.
It's just tough love. Swedish ninjas.
They scraped together some money and rebuilt the house over
makes
2
your
weeks to
voice
film
much
it again.
lower.
And this wonderful edit at
So
the
you
end
just want me to
is actually
sound
just the
like
end of the take
more
because they
girly.
used up the entire reel on the one shot. Reportedly, the cinematographer had advised Tarkovsky to use more than one camera for the shot the first time around, but the director decided against it. I mean, at least he didn't choose to bring 0 cameras, although he might as well have. Now I bet you're thinking, that's some pretty bad luck right there. Well, that's nothing. 7 years before filming The Sacrifice, Tarkovsky sacrificed his sanity to make this movie, Stalker. Stalker had one of the most difficult productions in cinema history, and possibly even caused Tarkovsky's death. You don't have to have seen Stalker to watch this video, but it's possible that you already have. It's currently the #1 most streamed movie on the new Criterion Channel streaming service. So let's see why one crew member described the production of Stalker as a mirror of a hellish trip. This is Cinema Tyler Show.
Do you guys want to watch this, or I was going to play World of Tanks Blitz? What do you want to? Do you want to finish watching this?
If you're unfamiliar with Andrei Tarkovsky, here is a mini bio. Andrei Tarkovsky was a Russian film director whose main work was between 1962 and 1986. His style was slow, methodical, and atmospheric, often involving really beautiful shots.
Yeah, I'm
of
kind of
nature.
sucked into this.
His
I want
father
to
was
finish
a poet,
watching
and
this.
you could say that Andrei was a poetic filmmaker. He's most similar to directors like Ingmar Bergman or Robert Bresson, and you most likely have seen his influence even recently. Much like Christopher Nolan today, Tarkovsky's main interest in the art of filmmaking revolved around time. He thought of filmmaking as sculpting in time, and he is known for lingering on a shot for long periods for the purpose of, as Roger Ebert put it, absorbing you rather than entertaining you. My favorite movie of his is The Mirror, but I would start with Ivan's Childhood, about a child army scout during World War II, which is more traditional, or Solaris, about a space station orbiting a mysterious planet that creates perfect copies of people from your memory, which is his movie that seems to have caught on the most in the mainstream, and is a direct answer to the cleanliness of Stanley Kubrick's Future in 2001: A Space Odyssey. Tarkovsky was quoted saying, "Let's make our space station look like a broken down bus." And he hated 2001: A Space Odyssey, by the way. And he hated it in a motivating way.
Oh.
It's very likely that we got Solaris because of 2001. And, it makes sense. Kubrick is one side of the brain and Tarkovsky is the other. And there's a fascinating video showing the similarity in style and imagery between
Swedish
the two
ninjas.
directors, which I'll put a
Why
link to
did
down in
you
the
assume that
description.
sulfur
Out of the 7
hexafluoride
features
is
Tarkovsky
dangerous?
directed, only Solaris and Stalker were really science fiction movies.
Well, you are a
And it's really
Swedish
interesting
ninja,
to
so I
see
kind of figured it
Tarkovsky
was
apply his
poison.
craft to science fiction. Personally, I would love to have seen a Tarkovsky horror movie or even like a screwball comedy or something. Apparently, he didn't consider himself a sci-fi fan, calling the genre full of comic book elements and vulgar commercialism. So I
Hey, he's
guess
not
he wouldn't
wrong.
like some of these sci-fi movies coming out now.
There's a
But
lot
I'm
more
sure there are
fiction
many
than
he would
science,
like, and
unfortunately.
many that were influenced by him. That said, shortly before his death, he saw James Cameron's The Terminator and said, "As a vision of the future and the relation between man and his destiny, the film is pushing the frontier of cinema as an art." Stalker takes place after a mysterious object from space crashes into a fictitious country. Troops were sent in, but never returned. The government put walls up around this zone to keep people away from its strange effect on reality. Imagine, if you can, a forbidden zone of unimaginable mystery and one unauthorized guide to the zone known as
Life is hard in the
hired to
zone.
sneak a writer and professor into the heart of the zone's magic. A room that grants the deepest desires of anyone who enters it. And it stars Natalie Portman.
Ew.
Just kidding. The film was based on a novella named Roadside Picnic by the Strugatsky brothers. And the film is extremely slow moving, but that's the point. It envelops you. You feel like you're there instead of watching the story happen to other people. I almost feel like some of these really long takes allow your mind to wander as if you were the character. You're intrigued by the nature of the zone and what will happen next, but you're given space to contemplate the concept as the character would without being told what to think at any given moment. And the movie seamlessly transitions into these contemplative segments. Tarkovsky hired Georgi Rurberg as cinematographer. Rurberg had shot Tarkovsky's previous film, The Mirror, in 1975. They wanted to use the expressive texture of the abandoned power plants in Estonia and Tallinn, which, as strangely beautiful as it was, caused lots of logistical problems.
I bet.
The crew often had to work in some very uncomfortable situations for hours on end, but we'll get more into that later. One of the earlier issues involved Tarkovsky's wife Larissa, who demanded to play the role of the stalker's wife in the film. She was very difficult on the set, earning the nickname the Empress. Rurberg asked Tarkovsky if he wanted Larissa or the actual actress, which was apparently enough to get Tarkovsky to come to his senses and hire Alyssa...
Fredlichen.
Larissa.
Alyssa Friendlich. Friendly, I'm pretty sure.
Alyssa. Larissa, his wife, was pissed, and she hated Rurberg. The real problems would begin once they got the footage back. The footage had been brought to a lab in Moscow to be developed, but when it was done, they noticed that the image looked dark and greenish. Now, I'm not sure why they were just starting to see the footage after several months of shooting, but nevertheless, the film was ruined. Months and months of extremely stressful, hectic work was destroyed. I mean, can you imagine looking back on all of the issues on the set and the problems, and realizing that you might as well have not have even had film in the camera at all? The problem was twofold: a mistake in the development along with a defective batch of film. Here are some stills from the ruined film so you can see what it looked like.
Wow.
They had been shooting on a film stock that was, at the time, experimental. Kodak 5247, actually one of the more famous film stocks. And the Soviet film labs were not yet experienced in how to develop it. Alien, The Shining, Star Wars, Blade Runner, and a ton of other classics were shot on that film stock. What happened next, as you can imagine, was a nightmare of determining who was to blame and the decision about whether or not to go on. They fired the second cameraman, who was apparently, quote, responsible for exposure, but it probably wasn't his fault. The next to go was the production designer, and so on down the line. Tarkovsky had already been having problems with the cinematographer, Rurberg, before the film stock was even ruined. Rurberg had said that he was trying to make his own film simultaneously. He even said that when he worked on The Mirror with Tarkovsky, which was Tarkovsky's autobiography, that, quote, Andrei made a film about himself and I about myself. Luckily, it was the same film. That's kind of messed up, right? I mean, isn't that like hiring a stalker to take you into the zone, but instead he just takes you over to his house so he can show you his Blu-ray collection? And you're like, what's so magical about this place? He's like, oh man, you just have to believe. You just have to believe, man. Rurberg was born into a highly intellectual family in 1937 during the height of Stalin's repression of poets and artists who were often arrested for their work. The thing you must realize is that Stalker is about an artist, a writer, who lives under a repressive government. Of course Rurberg is going to want to tell the story. His parents probably drilled into his mind the importance of authority in your artistic voice. So Tarkovsky and Rurberg would often butt heads on the set, and one time Tarkovsky asked Rurberg to do an effect that he saw in an Ingmar Bergman movie, and they even had a special studio made to get the effect, but Rurberg couldn't do it the way that Tarkovsky wanted, and Tarkovsky just flipped out on him. Man, I wish I knew what the effect was. If you have any idea, let me know in the comments. So when he found out that the film stock was ruined, Tarkovsky immediately fired Rurberg.
Hasta la vista, baby.
Baby.
This was a whole thing, and there was even a documentary made in 2009 detailing Rurberg's side called Rurberg and Tarkovsky, the reverse side of Stalker. In 1993, Tarkovsky's diaries were published. Not only did he write that Rurberg was a terrible cinematographer, but that he sucked as a person too. But this disdain might not have been as intense as it seemed. Apparently, Tarkovsky would often dictate his diary for various people to write down, including his wife, who, you'll remember, hated Rurberg's guts. According to his diaries, the 70s were particularly tough for Tarkovsky. At one point, he considered quitting the cinema entirely and directing theater productions. I mean, there can't be a problem with the film if there's no camera, right? And Stalker was actually the climax of
Bork, bork, bork.
Elino Lal. Money.
Because I keep accidentally clicking these box things.
Elino Lau. Make it faster.
Make it faster. If only. Hmm. Jeez, did these guys do any damage to the other team? such a terrible game.
Elino Lal. Classic BOI.
Let's get this show on the road.
Elino Lal. It's been very silent.
Sorry, my microphone was off. Doe. I don't know why it switched off. Oh, I think every time I switch to game mode, it turns my mic off or something. Yeah, if I don't talk for like 2 minutes or something, you should ask, like, is your mic on? Never be afraid to ask if my mic is on, I guess. Oh no. Are those two guys? Oh, okay.
Elino Lal. Sometimes I think you're just a little silent.
No, I'm kind of a chatterbox usually.
Противник уничтожен. Пробитие. Попадание. Пробил. Есть пробитие.
Oh, son of a bitch. Man, were we just outgunned? Come on, fuck him up, KV1. Do it. Fuck that Panzer up. Fuck him. Blow him up. Ah! God, this sucks. Watch me be picked apart. God. Let's see. Oh no, I actually did really good that match. It was my other teammates that let me down. Especially since, look, there was one guy who did fucking nothing, and they wasted that. This game is, like, frustrating in revealing how much people, like, want to play something that they're really not good at, I guess. I don't know. I'm not good at it either sometimes. The heck? We should play this more, but... I want my KV1, but I need more money. One more round, I guess. Although it seems to have slowed down a bit now. I don't know if that's just me.
Let's get this show on the road. We didn't even scratch them.
Elino Lau. I don't get this game.
We lost the track.
I don't think you're supposed to.
The driver is hit. We can't go very fast.
Holy fuck.
That one didn't go through.
Talk about a heavy tank rush. Jesus. of our heavy tanks. What are these guys doing? Shit in the bed, I guess. Like, what is he actually doing? And there's this guy. What's he doing? Oh, he's probably a bot. See if he ever actually fires on anything. Yeah, I guess that's it for the stream. I can't think of anything else to do, so I'll just close it down for now. So, yeah, thanks. Hope it was fun. Hope you guys had fun. Have a good night and take care.
Elino
Be
Lau.
safe.
CYA.